Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. And we're having an interesting discussion today with two very interesting and learned people. We have a first-time guest, Barbara Jones, who's the managing editor of the Minnesota Lawyer. And maybe I can hold that up and somebody can catch it. There we go. Which is the publication for lawyers here in the state. And it's like the Bible for lawyers, as a matter of fact. And that's under Barbara's aegis. And Mike McIntee, who's been here before, and Mike, who's the managing director of the Uptake, Citizens TV, and he's got so many accolades. He does radio, he does television. You certainly all saw the Uptake during the voter recount of the Franken election, among others. And we're talking about cameras in the courtroom, pro and con. Now we have 3 cameras in this courtroom, so obviously we're in favor of it insofar as we are concerned, but this is not really a courtroom, so it's a studio. Barbara, how do you feel about cameras in the courtroom?
Well, cameras in the courtroom are a fact of life. There's been rules in Minnesota that have allowed cameras in the courtroom for various degrees of use for a long time. My concern is with the fair trial and the sort of ineffable effects that the cameras have on the proceedings and the witnesses. I know it's a strange point of view for a journalist to take, but I am a lawyer also, and I think that what goes on in a courtroom is really kind of sacred, and it needs to be intruded upon very carefully. I'm not in favor of closing courtrooms. I'm not in favor of secret proceedings, and I'm not particularly concerned about cameras in the courtroom where there's a proceeding that's just between a judge and a lawyer, like your recount things, arguments. But where there's witnesses and juries and defendants and private parties, it gets dicey to me.
Mike, you obviously are someone who has had cameras in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm. I think cameras in the courtroom offer a great transparency to the process. It sounds like we're in agreement here. Some of the stuff that we've done with the recounts, mm-hmm. where there's a great public interest in what's going on and the outcome, and there aren't really so much somebody on trial as an issue is being decided. I think we're all in agreement on that really does lend, that is what cameras can really do well. I think what you're concerned about is when you get into a criminal trial, which the Minnesota Supreme Court rules right now are harder to get a camera into a courtroom for a criminal trial than it is for a civil trial. Mm-hmm. But in both cases, the Supreme Court here, before ordering this test, and we're technically in a test period right now.
Until May, we're in a test period, right?
Right. When they ordered this, they said that, well, we we've looked at what other states have done, and we've seen what the effects are, and we don't believe that there's any ill impact, or that the ill impact is mitigated by the good that is done. So the court itself has come back and said that we think that this is a good thing, but those rules are more liberal for when it comes to a civil proceeding like one company suing another than it is for somebody being on trial for murder.
As I was doing some research for this interview, I was really surprised with the number of states that do allow cameras in the courtroom. Certainly in civil proceedings, and many also in criminal proceedings, but then that takes us back to the O.J. Simpson trial, and what a travesty that was with cameras in the courtroom. So I have a great ambivalence about it, and maybe you could talk to that trial.
Well, that trial was atrocious. I mean, I don't think anybody disagrees with that. And most people that I know, and myself included, lay the blame for that on the judge for not controlling the lawyers and not controlling the press. You had a very odd combination of circumstances there, with some really big name lawyers and a relatively, if I recall correctly, inexperienced judge, and a prosecutor who was kind of ineffectual. You know, you had a lot of strange things happening there. Not to say that couldn't happen again, but you know, it was awful, and it wasn't necessary, I don't think, for the public to be able to watch that in person, watch the things with the gloves and all that. It might have been entertaining, but it wasn't necessary. It could have been written about just as well.
Of course, the whole country, though, was turned on the fact that you had this famous football player, famous star, O.J. Simpson, and was accused of murdering his wife and the young man who was with her at the time. There were all sorts of allegations as to his relationship with her. But what do you think about that, Mike?
Well, actually, I was involved in that kind of on the periphery, because the company I was working for was actually doing the pool feed of that to other media organizations, and was working with what was then West Publishing to do daily transcriptions of what was coming out of that courtroom. A lot of people are interested in what's going on. It's the prurient interest, and I frankly, you know, I think celebrity trials bore the hell out of me. People are interested because it's a soap opera. People are not interested because they think justice is going to be done. There are people who are, but that's what drives it. And frankly, I've always hoped that the American public was better than that, but they're not. And television news tends to seek the lowest common denominator, and that's what we end up with. The trouble is that gets lumped in with the other trials that really we do need a camera in the courtroom, and I think because that protects sometimes the defendant, sometimes it provides support for the prosecution, but it's
what kind of a trial?
Well, let's talk about there was a trial. I'll bring up an example here. We had a trial here and it was going to be the very first civil trial that was going to have a camera in the courtroom in Minnesota, and the Uptake was going to do it. And it was all about the foreclosures that had been going on in South Minneapolis and North Minneapolis because of, you know, all the stuff that's happened with the housing market. And there's a group called Occupy Homes that was trying to prevent these foreclosures. And one woman decided she was going to stand up and fight this and go to court. It was important to see that happen, but the judge, in this case a referee, decided, you know, at the very last minute to close off the camera and not allow it. And my assumption was, well, he's concerned that, you know, there's these folks from Occupy that might stand up and act up in the courtroom, and he doesn't want to give them a stage for that. I found out later that wasn't the case. I ran into the clerk for that judge later on, and that clerk told me, no, we weren't concerned about that. The judge was all for that. The trouble was, the people who were on the side of the prosecution, the sheriff's office, put pressure on the judge and said, we don't want this televised. We don't want people to see what's going on. And you see, that's when you really do need to see what's going on, is when one side doesn't want the world to see it. And that's when you try to hide something, that's when I worry about what's happening, and you really do need to show what's happening when somebody wants it hidden.
Well, that's a very disturbing story. Obviously, I would hate to. I hate to think that there was a judge or a referee who let one of the parties do that. And
Called political pressure.
Yes, but our judges are not supposed to rule like that, but obviously they do sometimes. All I can say, I still don't see though why you had to have a camera to expose that. Why couldn't you say, we're going to bring this to you, we would like to bring this to you, but we're not going to because the judge won't let us, and here's why the judge won't let us.
Well, one reason was that the courtroom was packed to beyond capacity. People wanted to see what was going on, and there were people who actually ended up having to stand outside who couldn't see. There was enough public interest that just having a large enough courtroom was important enough. And I think if
Could they have put a camera in the courtroom, not for public access, but to play out to the hall so that these crowds would at least get the opportunity to see what was happening in there?
You know, that would have been one solution. Right now, Hennepin County is still not set up for something like that. And that's part of the process that's, I think that's going on here, is figuring out what equipment needs to be done, what makes sense. I think one of the problems is that some judges might have, or some of the legal community might have, is control over the cameras, because what is being focused on is of concern. There are strict rules. You don't show the jury. You don't show certain things. But putting
If you had demonstrators even who stood up in the back and created a ruckus, they would not be on camera, and possibly that camera could be shut down until that disturbance was cleared up.
Right, but I would be hesitant to give the court the ability to control the cameras, because that's the media, and it's again saying what the media can and can't do, and it's a line as a journalist, I just wouldn't like to see crossed.
Well, it's the First Amendment situation that we're all concerned with. But what about you, as certainly someone who favors cameras in the courtroom? What happens if a defendant is acquitted? Here is somebody who's been held up in the public scrutiny, and certainly it affects that person, their name, their family, etc. And that could go for a witness as well.
I
The detriment that could happen.
I don't think all cases are camera worthy, and I think right now the decision gets put in the hands of the judge, which I think is the way to do it. The judge, I think is very much aware of those circumstances, and that's why certain trials probably would never be televised, because just what you described, there may, we get into child custody cases, we get into divorces, we get into all those types of things that really, you're dragging out somebody's dirty laundry for the sake of dragging out somebody's dirty laundry. I don't think those belong on television either.
But how do you differentiate?
That's why you have a judge make the decision.
I mean, we just had a trial involving a former athlete's wife in a homicide case. Yeah, the Amy Spencer case.
Yeah.
A censor case.
Right, censor,
and,
yes.
Yeah, and there were no cameras in that courtroom, but there certainly was a tremendous amount of public interest.
There was, and I'm not sure I agreed with putting a camera in that courtroom. They didn't, I believe, but
Barbara, what would you think in that situation?
Well, it's a criminal defense, a criminal trial, and a defendant's liberty is at stake, and I'm absolutely opposed to having a camera in the courtroom and in a criminal trial, and it's not necessary. Again, I'm not opposed to having reporters. I'm not opposed to having people
Artists?
making drawings, right? But I'm absolutely opposed, and I think that the courts are too. I I think that's the Rubicon, and I don't think that you're going to cross it. And I just watched the panel on the Uptake. Judge Guerin says criminal trials. That's the place that we don't. I don't think we're going to go. And so that's my point of view. And as an aside, I don't think there's a stone unturned in Amy Sensor's life. I see no reason. I don't think there's anything that the public needs to know about her.
Not only she, but her husband.
Family. Yeah.
And her husband, who played to the audience or to the crowd at some points. And their extended family, her stepdaughters and things like that.
There was that trial is very disturbing to me on a lot of levels, and one of them is, and the way it was staged, the theater that went on all around it with Miss Censor and the press and her lawyer. And
I think we're in agreement here that a lot of criminal cases, and I'm not going to say absolutely every criminal case, but most criminal cases probably don't would be affected by having a camera in the courtroom, and probably aren't a place to put one. However, I still think the judge needs the option, and right now I think Minnesota has a very good rule in this test area, which is where both the prosecution and the defense have to agree in a criminal trial that it's okay to have cameras in the courtroom. I believe that actually it maybe should be more up to the defense than the prosecution, because you always want the defense to have the last word, and if it's the defense saying yes or no, I think that would be even better than letting both parties. But whatever we need to do.
I think most judges would look at it that way. I mean, I think that the judges would give more weight to what the defense wanted in that case. But back to what you said about the cameras, and this is a kind of a systemic problem that we have right here, is you don't want the judges in control of the cameras.
No.
And I certainly understand that, but I'm not sure that you are taking into account that judges are very territorial about their courtrooms, and the idea that you're going to tell the judge that you're going to be in charge of anything in a courtroom is going to be met with extreme resistance. I think
What happens when you say strike that from the record?
Pardon me?
Strike that from the record, and you have cameras in the courtroom, and you can't strike it from.
Well, the jury can't. Jury. You tell the jury pay no attention to that remark. They still heard it. So that's really the only people who really count who are watching this trial.
The print reporters who heard it too, so they write it. So.
And they write it.
And will report on it, possibly.
Yeah, so that doesn't change.
But the judge is in charge of the courtroom, and it's very clear to the reporters and to the camera people that if they get out of line and do something that they shouldn't, they are going to face the judge's wrath, and that might be the camera might be pulled. So they know that they've got to follow the rules, and I think that we've got some very good rules that have been set down. The jury, not on camera, the defense and the prosecution in criminal trials getting to veto whether the cameras get in. But I think on the civil side of things, I think having the judge in charge of saying yes or no is a great way to do it.
Of course, most civil cases people wouldn't be terribly interested in unless they have Judge Judy sitting up there ruling on them.
Well, I think as we get into more some of the corporate cases that actually have an impact on people's lives and the public, I think it's really important in those cases that we do have the option of bringing in a camera. And as you said, there's not the interest. As we get more diverse news organizations, as the Uptake and other groups that are interested in particular topics, I think you're going to see more cameras wanting to get into those type of trials, and more information getting out.
Now, some states have a rule, and I'll direct this to Barbara really, that one camera cannot be seen, cannot be heard. And so that it's functioning in the courtroom, but the people don't see it, the jurors don't necessarily see it, and it's not making noise, etc. What about that situation?
Well, I'm not familiar with those states. But it bothers me to think of anything going on in a trial that the parties don't know about. That doesn't seem fair to me.
Well, they might know that the camera is there, but it's not going to be a distraction in terms of being physical.
Right, I understand that. I don't, but well, you know, there are certainly a lot of mitigating things you can do, but I still think that a camera is going to influence the proceedings and in some ineffable way, and there is not going to be any way to allow for that on an appeal because there's not going to be any proof of it. It's very amorphous, and it's a problem to me and to a lot of people.
Or, on the other hand, might the camera capture something that even the court reporter misses? A facial expression, a nuance, shifty eyes of a witness, something like that, that the court reporter can't pick up.
Right, the
and
court reporter.
If the lawyer stands up and says, tell him to stop shifting his eyes like that, the judge will say, out of order.
Right, right. Right, I mean, you can come up with examples of things that would happen that would be useful to have a camera.
That's why I love sitting here
Yeah.
being the devil's advocate.
There's always those examples, but they're very rare. I mean, trials are actually, you know, pretty boring, a lot of them, a lot of the time, and they're just people kind of whispering to each other, and you know, there isn't a lot going on. But certainly you can find those examples, but I don't think there's enough of them.
Of course, one thing we haven't talked about, Mike, did I just cut you off from saying something?
Well, I was going to just say there's really two courts sometimes that you're looking at. There's a court that is actually deciding the case, and again, I'm going to talk about the civil area because I think that's where this should be focused on. And then there's the court of public opinion. And the court of public opinion often renders its decision through many ways, through people saying, well, you know what, that company did something horrible. I don't trust that person. I'm not going to spend with them. I'm not going to buy from them. You know, that's almost just as important here because I think that is an additional thing that companies need to think about or individuals need to think about when they commit something, that there's more than just the civil penalty. There's also your entire reputation that is at stake. And if you don't have a chance to address that reputation with the full force of your emotions and everything that you can see about the case, I don't think you're giving somebody a full hearing in the court of public opinion as well.
One thing we haven't talked about, appellate courts. Now, the United States Supreme Court has been very definite. There will be no cameras in this courtroom. Frankly, on an appellate level, I see much less reason to object to cameras in the courtroom. Why shouldn't people be able to see appellate judges working and questioning and deciding a case?
I really can't think of any reason why they shouldn't. I would have no problem with it. As I said, my concern is about victims and witnesses and defendants. And you know, the rules in Minnesota allow for coverage of appellate proceedings, and if the U.S. Supreme Court would get off its high horse and be respectful to the public, that'd be fine with me. But it's not going to happen in the foreseeable future.
There are 400 seats in the U.S. Supreme Court. We have a case on health care. The whole country is interested in the Affordable Care Act. 400 people can be there, and including the reporters, and the rest of the country has to rely on print media, or there is audio now that's available about an hour after the argument.
Right.
But still, don't you think that people all over the country would have been looking the arguments in that case?
Well, I think lawyers all over the country would have been. I think the arguments were, yes, I think the arguments might have been kind of boring to a lot of people. They were very technical, but, and as I said, bring it on as far as I'm concerned with the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and take a look when that decision came down, how the media got it wrong. Several media outlets got it wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
one, because they're not used to reporting that kind of stuff, but two, because of the system they had to set up to do it. I mean, really there you're dealing with tradition, and I think people who are just stuck in their ways. We've seen with our appellate courts here in Minnesota, as well as our Supreme Court in Minnesota, that video is a friend, video is a great way of getting it out. And I found when working with the courts here that they really do want to be seen in what they're saying and what's being decided.
And the fact of the matter is, we talk about more transparency in the judiciary, and we talk about the First Amendment, and we talk about the right of the people to know. All of those things lie on the side of, yes, more disclosure, cameras in the courtroom. And then we talk about privacy and intrusions and people's reputations. And then it goes to Barbara's argument that we can do damage here. So I frankly don't know the answer, but I think it's really interesting to involve a discussion like this.
Well, it has to be, that's what courts do. They balance various different factors on a case-by-case basis and try to make some sort of fair decision about what's in the best interests in a criminal trial of the defendant, mainly, but also what's fair to the state and to the public. But as I said, I see no reason to think that you're going to get into criminal trials anytime soon. So,
and of course, the Uptake had cameras on 2 recount elections that were watched not only here in Minnesota, but nationally, and certainly gave great prominence to your organization.
Yeah, and again, I think we're comparing apples and oranges here when we start talking about civil proceedings like the recount and criminal trials. I think they are 2 very different things, but absolutely the having the cameras there for the recount and the camera there for various civil proceedings, I think is almost a no-brainer. It's when we get into discussing about somebody's potential freedom is at stake, and should we have some sort of extra protections there, that's when people start wondering, does a camera belong there or not?
That's where you've got to start balancing. Because I agree that covering the recount the way that you covered it was fine. I don't know anybody who disagrees.
It enabled us in our homes to see exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
It made the outcome more trustworthy.
To see the hanging chads.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't have
we didn't have any
hanging
hanging
chads
chads.
here, but
No, we got to see the lizard people.
Lizard people, that's right.
Yes. We've been talking about cameras in the courtroom, yay or nay, and we have some large areas of agreement, and we have some strong feelings both ways on other areas. Barbara Jones is the managing editor of Minnesota Lawyer, which is the Bible of lawyers in this community. Mike McIntee, who, among other things, is the managing editor of the Uptake, which has covered trials. Actually, you've covered trials in other states, I think, or some of your affiliates have, as well as the recounts here. And I thank you both for coming in here and sharing your thoughts with us. I admit that I can be swayed either way on some of the arguments. I think it's a very, very knotty question that still awaits resolution. And I thank you both for coming in here and sharing your thoughts with our viewers. I'm sure we're going to hear more about this in the future. Thanks again. Thank you, Barbara. Oh, try to shake hands with guests.
There we go.
And